All right, hello everyone. Welcome to this very new video, even the new video for this channel, my very first video of this channel. As you can see from the title today, this is going to be a topic about what St. Justin Martyr Subordinationist Part 1, because I'll be doing a part series about this. And a topic I wanted to discuss about because what's been going around in the online circles and even some academic circles that St. Justin Martyr, a second century Christian apologist, they claim was not a Trinitarian. He's more of a subordinationist Christian, that he had a view of his subordinationism, and they'll even quote on some quotations of Justin Martyr showing that he was not a Trinitarian, he was subordinationist, so he's really not a what we like to say a proto-Trinitarian at all, or even a Trinitarian whatsoever. And we'll be even going on topic of every well-known argumentation and quotes they'll bring up. We're gonna be going over that, and we're going to see this is really not the case. What's going on with Saint Justin the Martyr? So, like I said, this is a part one of the series. We were doing a series about this. So, we're going to be discussing on the very first point. So, the main objection here, the very first objection, is that they'll quote from the newadvent.org translation I have here in the screenshot of it. This is Dialogue with Trifle the Jew, chapter 56. So, we'll say here, of what I said that there's said to be another God and Lord subject to the maker of all things. So, the thing I have highlighted here, even the screenshot in orange, is that the word subject. Philip Schaff, the translator, would translate that and say, hippo, the Greek word, will be subject. And when people see that, and many will argue that this means an ontological subordination, that the Son is ontologically less than the Father, inferior than the Father in divinity. He's not equal to the Father in divinity whatsoever, that there is a superior God and an inferior God. And even some scholars will even say that Justin Martyr had this view, and even going so far as to say that Justin Martyr was more of a semi-Arian or even a proto-Arian. But I'll be discussing why this is really not the case what's going on here. Well, to point out, point one is that Muslim and anti-Trinitarians are quoting the translation from newadvent.org that translates the Greek word hippo to the meaning subject, which does not mean in the Greek. It actually means is under or by, or sometimes even translated as besides from some scholars and some translations, to the maker of all things or creator of all things. Because the Philip Schaff translation does not really rely or doesn't even look at the actual what the Greek has to say. And in fact, 9 times out of 10, it should actually be translated as the word under, or sometimes even by, or like I said, besides, that actually would have relied on the critical Greek text of Justin the Martyr. And here's an example of it. This is the CUA translation, Catholic University American Press. This is from, again, a scholarly work from Thomas B. Falls. This is relying on the critical Greek text of Justin. This is actually, in fact, in English if you want to read it from the PDF. And page 232 of Justin, it should actually be read here, that there's to be mentioned another God and Lord under the creator of all things. So now the translation has the word under, not subject. Now should be translated as under, which you see highlighted red here. Now, this is coming from a scholar, Erwin Argunoff, the theology of Justin Martyr. He actually would translate a God and Lord besides the creator of the universe. So again, we see here that two translations are not translating the way that the New Advent translation will be having as the word subject to the maker of all things. Now, people will point the fact that the word under, okay, it's under. Well, there's a form of hierarchy that the Father is above the Son and the Son is under the Father in power and authority and hierarchy and all these things. So there's still a form of subordination. And well, that's not really the case. Why? There's actually two views you can argue from this very stance. Can it mean a form of hierarchy? Yes, it can. But can it mean something else? Yes, it can as well. And I'll be arguing from the first position. My first position actually will be it can mean an actual term of location and space. It can actually mean of a form of a place where the Father is in heaven, the Son on earth. So it doesn't have to mean actual hierarchy and reasons to why. Because I'm going to myself going to be arguing from a theological view. The theological view I'm going to be arguing is that the Son is the visible one on earth, the Father is the invisible one in heaven. And understanding first and second century Judaism language and even some Christian language of the centuries of the first and second is that they understood that there's a locational place where the God is in heaven, God the Son is on earth, always appearing in the form of the angel or as a form as a man. And 9 times out of 10 throughout the Hebrew Bible, the angel is usually active on earth and God is usually active, what you say, the Father in heaven. He usually never appears on earth, basically, what's not so ever, usually never. appears. It's always the angel. And for example, in Judges chapter 13, verses 20 to 22, Manoah in the context is making a altar to God and making a burning incense to God. And it says, toward from heaven the altar, the angel Lord ascending into the flame of the altar. So again, the angel is actually appearing in on earth in such matter, but you like to say he's appearing in the matter realm. And it even says that then Manoah knew that he was the angel of the Lord. So he knew this is the angel, this is the person that's appearing to him, this is the angel, not the Father. And Manoah says to his wife, we shall certainly die because we have seen God. Well, this is very important because throughout the Old Testament, Hebrew Bible, God says, no one can see my face and live. That's a very key thing to God. But yet, Manoah is afraid because he saw the angel. So he knows this is the angel who is distinct from God, but yet is God because he's afraid because he has seen God and he's going to die for that very cause of seeing. Now, what is this theology that's going on here? Well, this is what you call the two powers in heaven. This is very prevalent in early Judaism, and I'm going to be going into that in depth much later. So, this is another point right here. Even Justin Martyr even agrees to the fact that the angel Lord is the visible God who manifested visibly to the patriarchs, where the Father has not been seen because he dwells in an unseen place. And Justin Martyr really makes it clear. He says in page 231, he says, whoever abides in a super celestial fear, who has never been seen by any man, with whom no man has ever conversed, and whom we call creator of all and Father. So again, Justin Martyr makes it clear the Father cannot be seen because he dwells in an unseen place. But the God who has been seen, has been spoken to, has been talked with, has been done all these things, is the Son, God the Son, the angel of the Lord, which Justin Martyr makes it very clear. Again, like I said, with the part of the two powers in heaven, Alan F. Siegel, a Jewish scholar and academic, understanding even the language of Justin Martyr against Trypho. Justin Martyr actually will be using references from Philo of Alexandria, since Justin and Trypho are very familiar with Philo's language, because Philo is very, very prevalent, and a lot of Jewish scholars very well known of Philo's language. Philo speaks about what you call a dyad, or a binitarian view of God, that there are two distinct realities within God, what you call God the Father and God the Logos, or what you call the wisdom of God. This theology was actually an orthodox view of Judaism. This was actually very well known and very prevalent in Judaism theology of the Second Temple, basically 300 BC. And this wasn't really condemned of a heresy up until the second century. Many academics note that this was because of the Christian movement stating that the second power became incarnate as the Son, Jesus Christ of Nazareth, and they later on dropped this view. But this at first was not heretical, it was widely well known and used and believed upon that God is actually a dyad or a binitarian God. There's a plurality within God. So on page 43, he actually, Alan F. Siegel says, different theophany text was known to Philo and used by him, but it was later opposed by rabbis who called other people who espoused that kind of argument two-power heretics. So Philo was considering the view of what you call the two-power heretics. A lot of Alan F. Siegel's work will say heretics because, again, he is a Jew, so he will view as heretical. Again, in page 76, this is very important right here, because in the Jewish Hebrew tradition, that heaven and earth can be referred as two gods. So he says, he also maintains that heaven and earth might be taken to mean two gods. The two powers is involved, meaning that there is the God on heaven and the God on earth, meaning the Father in heaven, the Son on earth. Now you notice two distinct locations, the one who is under the heavenly throne, under heaven, and the one who is in heaven in a place that no man can see there, no man can, check there, none of that. So this is where you see there's a distinction within location, the one on earth, the one in heaven, the one under the heavenly throne. So we can actually argue this is a locational place. And again, on page 168, we understand that he interprets, even Alan F. Siegel says that Moses really doesn't see God, but the Logos. So every time when people see God is actually Logos or the angel of the Lord, the place where God stands, and the angel or the Logos will appear as a man figure astride the world. So again, throughout the Old Testament, Justin Martyr and a lot of Christian fathers, church fathers, will say that it is the Son who actually appears as the angel. He is the visible God. The Father is the invisible God. Again, the first significant extra rabbinical evidence of two-power tradition is from Philo. He actually used the term two gods, which is synonym for two powers in rabbinical thought or rabbinic thought. Again, Philo does say there are two gods, but what he means is two powers, not two different gods as in the fact that they're different, but more in the fact that they are two. There's two somethings basically within God, a dyad, a binitarian view. Each of them are fully God, but they are distinct. So we should call them two gods. Now, this is from Little Del Scott's Dictionary from the TLG. It's an online website. It's called the Thesaurus Linging Rece. It is a website, it's a machine that you can plug in Greek words and terms, and it will find definitions for you. It's basically 95 to 99% accurate on finding them, and it will give you a whole sum of definitions and understanding. Even will connect who use these type of languages and words. For example, a lot of Cappadocian fathers actually use terms and languages from ante-Nicene fathers, and even Justin Martyr would use language from Philo, many terms and understanding. So when we plug the word hippo, this is actually the definition we get from the Little Del Scott's Dictionary. It says a position or extension under an object, even will say everywhere under the sun. It's giving you a lot of instances what the word can mean. It can also mean a locational space, a locational place. So we can actually argue this will just simply mean the word under can mean as significant as in spatial, that the Son is under the Father and from the heavenly throne. Now, as we continue on, this is one of the arguments why Justin Martyr is not really classified as Arian or even a semi-Arian. This is one of the arguments as to why. Because Justin Martyr uses the fire analogy. The fire analogy is widely well known throughout his time, and actually be later on used by the Cappadocian fathers like Gregor of Nyssa and Gregory the Theologian, even maybe Saint Basil himself. Even some Latin fathers would use this analogy of fire, fire. And what does he mean by fire and fire? So he says here, we can observe a similar example in nature. One fire kindles another without losing anything, but remaining the same, yet the enkindled fire seems to exist of itself and to shine without lessening the brilliancy of the first fire. So Justin Martyr makes the very point that when the Father begets the Son, the Father doesn't divide himself or cut himself for the Son to be begotten. And that very fire that is begotten, it will shine the same way as the first one. Because it says, without lessening the brilliancy of the first fire, meaning the second fire that appears to exist by itself, independent, will not be like a little torch compared to a big torch. It'll actually be two big torches because the same intensity will be shared. So the Father's intensity, meaning his divine essence, will be shared fully, and the Son will express that divine essence the same exact way as the first fire, meaning the Father. And again, in page 347 and 348 says, for I stated that this power was generated from the Father. That's very important to remember. From the Father, by his power and will, not by apposition. The Greek word is apotomi, as if the substance of the Father were divided. I cite examples of fire kindled from a fire. The enkindled fires are indeed distinct from the original fire, which though it ignites many other fires, still remains the same undiminished fire, meaning that this power, the wisdom generated from the Father by his power, is not by abscission, as if the Father took a piece of chunk from himself or a little, he cut himself a little bit just to cause the Son. No, because it's going to cut off whatever the substance is. The substance of the Father is not into parts, it's not composite. So this is more of a spiritual act. The spiritual act of the fire begetting another fire. There's a date in the distinction. You see now two fires distinct, but yet they're the same fire, same substance is being shared. There's not a little piece of fire burning on the very match. No, it's the whole fire that's burning the same way as the first fire. The divine essence shared. This is actually the substantial unity of the Father and the Son sharing the same divine essence in Justin's language. Again, Justin continues on to say, just as we see happening in the case of fire, which not lessen when it's kindled another, but remains the same, and is way been kindled by likewise appears to exist. It appears to be exist by itself, not diminishing that from which he has kindled. The word of wisdom, who is himself this God, begot of the Father of all things, and word, and wisdom, and power, and glory of the begetter. So we understand that the word is the power of the Father, is the wisdom of the Father, is the glory of the Father, and the word of the Father. So this God is begotten is the very image, the very copy of the Father. Kind of getting allusions to Hebrews chapter 1, verse 3. So again, this very word is the very exact match of the Father, the very exact image of the Father. There's no severance whatsoever between the two persons here. Again, now we have witnesses. So witnesses we have is actually two contemporary witnesses we have and one hostile witness that will give us an indication of Justin Martyr's theology and understanding of Justin Martyr's thought. So the first is actually a hostile witness. It will be Eusebius of Caesarea. Eusebius says he gives an understanding that Justin Martyr is not a semi-Arian or subordinationist or even a tritheist, and we'll explain why. It's because he quotes apart from Irenaeus. Irenaeus is a staunch Trinitarian. Now, the reason as to why we say Eusebius says there is a hostile witness is because he's not venerated as a saint in the churches, because he was a pacifist with Arians during the Arian controversy, basically during Athanasius, the great Saint Athanasius' time. Eusebius says he should not be fully condemned as a heretic outright, like a theological heretic, like his theology was whack. No, more in effect, it was being a political pacifist. He wasn't on board with the Nicene Creed. So he at first was reluctant of signing it. He was actually on board with the Arian Creed at first. He had a different form of the creed. And later on, he was peer pressured to sign the Nicene Creed when later on he actually figured it out. And later on, he actually now fully agrees. So that's why he's classified as a semi-Arian. But here, page 171, he says that Irenaeus is seen borrowing from them and writing as follows in the fourth book against heresies. Justin speaks very good sense in the book he wrote against Marcion, that he goes on to write that he would never agree with the Lord himself if he said that there was another God besides the creator of all. So what Eusebius is basically saying is that Justin himself would never agree with God himself, basically Christ, if he said that there was another different ontological being alongside the Father, with the Father. He would not have agreed to the stance. That's actually basically the subordinationist view. But Justin Martyr won't agree to that. So this is actually going to be a complete wipe to believe that Justin really did believe in such subordinationist view. Now we have Tatian, an actual disciple of Justin Martyr, who was taught by Justin Martyr. Tatian is, again, not a saint because he's very infamous for his work of the Diatessaron, so he's considered not a saint for that. But Tatian will expound upon even in the analogy of Justin Martyr's fire analogy, and he will expound upon it. What does he mean by that? So Tatian actually starts off and said the Logos himself also, who was in him, meaning the Father, subsists, and by simple will the Logos springs forth. Meaning, a lot of scholar and academics view that this is called what you call the two-stage Logos, meaning that Hippolytus, basically Tertullian, Tatian, some parts of Justin, they lead to the point of what you call the two-stage, meaning that eternally the Father had the Son within him, his very mind, his very reason, his very rationality. And then when the Father begot the Son for the purpose of creating, which we call the second stage, the beginning, the coming from or coming forth out. Again, this is not really heretical, but we don't really point the fact, or we really Trinitarians, we don't really use this type of language because now we have basically explained much better of the Trinitarian view and the procession of the Son. But this is really not heretical if we understand more clearly in the context of what they mean and not take them out of context. This is not really heretical. It's just really understanding what the Christians view of the processions within God, basically before Nicaea. But again, it's not heretical. So what actually Tatian says, he says, but he came into being participation. Again, came into being doesn't mean he came from nothing to something. It just simply mean by participation, acting upon it, not by abscission. Exactly what Justin Martyr says. What is cut off is separated from the original substance. He makes it very, very, very clear. If the Father cuts himself, the Son does not share the substance. But he says what is cut off is not from the substance, it's separated from it. So the Son must share that very substance from who he is begotten from, the Father's substance, the very essence of the Father. And Justin makes it very clear the Son is not from an abscission, he's from the beginning entirely. But that which comes by participation makes his choice of function, does not render him deficient from when is taken. Just as from on one torch many fires are lighted, but lights of the fire torch did not lessen by kindling many torches. So the Logos coming forth from the Logos power of the Father has not divested the Logos power him who begotten, meaning the Father does not, it means that God the Father does not go lesser in divinity, does not go lower in degree just to beget the Son. He does not do that. The Father remain who he is, what he is, and he will begot the Son and will beget the Son the way he is. So the Son is who the Father is entirely and wholeheartedly, not a piece. He's fully what the Father is. Now, we have a doctor of the church, Saint Irenaeus. Saint Irenaeus, actually, in the context, he's actually mentioning Justin and Marcion, his debate against Marcion. This is actually what Saint Irenaeus has to say. He says, while he received testimony from all that he was very man and that he was very God. Actually, this is giving an illusion of the hypostatic union. He says, but the Son, administering all things for the Father, For the Father's work, from the beginning even to the end, and without him no man can obtain knowledge of God. For the Son is the knowledge of the Father. The knowledge of the Son is in the Father and has been revealed through the Son. For the Son, being present with his own handiwork from the beginning, reveals to the Father to all whom he wills, and when he wills, and as the Father wills. Wherefore then, in all things, through all things, there is one God, the Father, one Lord, and one Son, and one Spirit, and one salvation to all who believe in him. Now, simply enough, Irenaeus is actually saying that Justin agrees to the very fact that Justin believes that the Son is very man and very God. This is the hypostatic union, and that the Son was with the Father from the beginning, even to the end. That the Son is the very knowledge, the very mind of the Father. The Father's mind is the Son's mind. Whatever you know about the Father is through the Son. Whatever you know about the Son is through the Father as well. There is a reciprocal knowledge happening here. Irenaeus is making. He says, for the Son being present was only handiwork from the beginning with the Father. And whatever the Son chooses to do something, the Father chooses to do something. Very clear to contemporary of Irenaeus. And Irenaeus, who attacked heresies, if he saw Justin was a subordinationist, he would have attacked him right off the bat. But yet Irenaeus hasn't done that. So Irenaeus truly uses Justin to point his fact to the Trinitarian view. And so, the fact that Justin Martyr even makes it clear that worship is given to Almighty God and God alone. In page 51 in his Pelagia, he says, he convinced us that only God is to be worshipped. So, only the Creator, not the created, are only worthy of worship. He makes it very clear. And page 52 says, for only God do we worship. So, only, again, the Creator can only be worshipped in the very next page. So Justin Martyr makes it very clear, only the creator, not the created. Well, what does Justin say about the Son? Because supposedly claiming that the Son is created. Well, so what does he say about the Son? In fact, Justin actually said the Son is to be worshipped. So let's see here. Logically, it should follow Justin truly believes Christ is God for him to say Christ is to be worshipped. And this is what he says. Page 270 says that he being Christ was the mighty God and thus to be adored, meaning to be worshipped, because adored can mean worship. Very, very interesting. He says that. In fact, it says Jesus is to be worshipped both as God and Christ. As God. 248. Now he goes on to say in 46, he says, we shall prove that we worship him of reason, since we have learned that he's the Son of the living God himself, and believe him to be in the second place, and the prophetic spirit in the third. Well, this is interesting. This is an early illusion of the Trinity happening here, because God the Father first, the Son in the second, and the Holy Spirit in the third. This is a form of rank. So Justin is giving an early form of indication that there is a triad, that there is a triad in God, that there are distinct realities within God. And this is going to be very, very important to understand Justin. So Justin truly believes that the Son is to be worshipped because he's from God the Father himself, and he's in second place with the Father. In fact, Justin Martyr, this is a big point here in page 193. He actually quotes from the part of Daniel 7 in the Greek text. He says that all their families, basically earth by their families, in glory serve him. Now, that word serve is very important because that's only given in temple worship, basically adoration given to God and God alone, specifically priestly service, sacrificial service, basically. And Christ even affirms that service is given to God, where he says, you shall worship the Lord your God and serve him only. Which, in fact, when Justin's quoting the text from Daniel in the Greek text, the word that Justin says is latruo, worship given to God and God alone. So Justin truly does believe that God is to be worshipped, yet says that the Son of Man is to be served, Christ is to be worshipped and adored. That logically must follow. Justin truly believes Christ is God for him to be worshiping Christ. Now, this is the big point I want to point out, because people use Arius's interpretation and theological views on Justin and say that he had the same views as Arius, and say that Justin is basically arguing the same thing as Arius. Well, let's see. Do they really argue the same point, or do they contrast? And I'll be showing they actually, in fact, do contrast a lot here. So here's the very big point I think people overlook or forget, that Justin Martyr was a Middle Platonist. Middle Platonists believe that time began when God created creation, meaning when God started the heavens and the earth, that's when actually time began. Before all that, there was really no time. So when he said that the Son is eternal, or before all things, or begotten before things, that actually means before all time, begotten before all time. This is actually what he says in 299. He who is before all things, that's why I highlighted in purple, the eternal priest of God. Again, the eternal priest of God. This is showing that he believes that the Son is before all time, before all creatures, the Son is eternal, something that God is, even so fact that even Arius does not agree. And I'm not the only one who even argues this. A Middle Platonist scholar named Marian Hiller, who even points the fact that Justin Martyr wasn't truly a Trinitarian in the Nicene sense, but yet concedes the fact that Justin says that the Son is begotten before all creatures or being a rational principle, then that must mean Jesus existing in a timeless existence, making him eternal. And yes, he does agree with that. In page 157, he says, if we assume, however, in accordance with Platonic doctrine, that time was created with the world, then in the timeless existence of God beginning his logos, of his logos, the firstborn of all creations and the beginning of everything, must also be timeless, thus eternal. Justin names the begotten logos as the Christ Messiah, thus changing the whole concept of the Jewish Christ Messiah. Again, I have to agree to that point because I believe that it's the same thing for the Jewish Christ Messiah, is also as well as eternal, but it's a whole nother topic. That here the scholars actually point out the fact that when God begets the Son before all creation, before all time, that must mean the Son is eternal. The Son existed in timeless eternity past. And this is actually, I think, is overlooked by a lot of people when they look at Justin's writing. Now, another point, so there's a lot of highlighted parts I was talking about. So the blue parts are the very important parts I want to get here. So the blue parts are the very important parts. The purple part, again, the before all creatures. The red parts are actually the part that I actually changed, and I'll explain why. So let's start off here. God begot Geneki. Actually, in fact, when you look over, you'll see there's always that double N always happening here. That signifies a parent begetting an offspring, a parent begetting a child, a son, a parent begetting from himself. Kind begets kind. That's very important. We must remember. So it says, God begot, Geneki, before all creatures. Remember, Middle Platonism and what the scholar just said means before all time, a principle. Now, most English translations will say a beginning, but the point I want to say that's not wrong. A beginning is not wrong. It is fine. It's pretty accurate. But people misunderstand will say that the Son is the beginning creature. He is the very first creature that God is. Well, the fact that's not correct because the word arche can actually mean his principle. And again, I think Justin Martyr is using more philosophical terms here in his dialogue. So more in fact, he's saying the Son is the principle. And again, understanding Jewish concept and Christian ideas, principle, God used wisdom as the principle for creation. God used wisdom to create things. So the wisdom is the very starter or principle of all things. So this is more and more accurate to say the principle. A certain rational power. So again, it is a rational power. It's not just an external innate thing that has no living. It is rational. It can rationalize from himself. So the green part is very important. I want to hearken to that. From himself. So it is from the Father, comes from the Father. This principle comes from the Father. And it says, for he can be called by those names since he ministers to the Father's will, and since he was begotten, genestai, again, the double N, begotten from a parent, by an active purpose. So again, the English translation will say active will. That's fine, but people can misunderstand say that the Son was created a byproduct of the Father's will, that the Father willed the Son at some point in time to come into be. Again, that's not correct. Again, the word thelesi or thelesis can actually mean a word like more like desire. Again, God doesn't really desire. When God does things, he does things in a purposeful manner. So again, even Justin says somewhere else in his dialogue, he says that the Son was begotten for the purposes of creating. So I think this will more align here when it says the active purpose, because the Father begot the Son for the purpose of creating. So by an active purpose, I think it will work more here, and I think it works here more appropriately. Because again, he's talking more in a philosophical term. Again, he says, we beget, genomen. And it says we also see happening in the case of fire, genomenon. Again, we see genomen, something, the word comes from us. Because the word is not actualized something external to us. The word is actualized when we say something, when we speak about it, but it's from our mind. It's from us. It comes from our breath, from our thoughts, from our mind, not something external outside of us. So using that analogy for the Son is something eternal and internal from the Father's mind, not something external from the Father. That's very important to key on to there. Again, so the Little Del Scots Dictionary, again, from the Thesaurus Lingua Grece, will actually interpret the word genao or genomenon or genomen. The double N there will interpret that's mostly of the father or of a mother, bring forth, to bear, produce from oneself. Basically, from themselves is produced. Now, the word here create doesn't actually mean ex nihilo creation, but more in a fact of like understanding classical philosophy from Aristotelian language and Platonic philosophy. It can just simply mean to be brought forth to causation, basically. That's where you get the word causal right here. So it's from oneself. Again, Bible Hub and New Dictionary understood that the word genao, because that's the root word of genomenon, genotes, all these double N's, that's from the root word genao. And again, it is basically variation of kind, to be brought forth, to be born, to be, to be coming from, to be sprung, usually refers to a father, properly of the father. So the father gives birth to the son, begets the son, produces the son, basically. And it comes from the father. It says produce of offspring, to be born, begotten. In the Bible, Christ says the begotten of the father, meaning his very child, his son. And in fact, this is what a scholar has to say about Justin when he uses that term from J&D Kelly, page 96. He says, as regards of his nature or his nature, while other beings are made or creatures, the Logos is God's offspring. Genao, his child and unique son. Before all creatures, God begot in the beginning a rational power out of himself. But this generation or emission does not entail any separation between the father and his son. Again, you see here I highlighted red, genao, again, a parent begetting an offspring. It comes from the father. So this is a very important thing. So far, what we're understanding, Justin seems very clear of a Trinitarian. This does not have a language of an Arian or even a semi-Arian view here. And I'll explain much why further. What areas, why does he contradict what Justin says here? So far, not subordinationist here. In fact, Justin will actually quote two times from Proverbs chapter 8. So when he quotes the first part, he's quoting from the Greek text of the LXX of Proverbs, not the Hebrew, because the Hebrew is really not an issue, but people hearken to the Greek to argue that the Son is created like basically ex nihilo. And even Arius will use this. He's infamously for using Proverbs chapter 8, specifically when it says the word he set, meaning ekatiste, means to create, he create me in the beginning. So he will argue on that fact, and even the word ketitzo. Ketitzo used throughout the Hebrew Bible, it does mean, to start, to create, to establish. But what did Justin say about this? How did he understood about this fact? Because he quotes it again. He says, the Lord begot me. So now he's understanding is the form of begetting. In the beginning of his ways for his works, just like I said, the Son is begotten for the purposes of creating. So again, this aligns with exactly what I mean by Justin. And the thing I highlighted in red, it says, I was set up, I was with them, I was there. That term I signifies that this wisdom is personal, speaking in the first person, not just a metaphorical language happening here. There's an actual literary understanding of the word being an actual person with God. Now, how did Justin finish off understanding Proverbs chapter 8? In fact, he actually finished off by saying here, he says, if you perceive my hearers, if you bestow the attention that the scriptures have declared that this offspring was begotten, again is seen by the Father before all things are created, basically all things created, meaning again, before all time, that which is begotten, genomenos, is numerically distinct, other arithmo heteros, from that which he begets, genantos. So again, you see here the double N, parent begetting child, parent begetting offspring from themselves. So he's even arguing that the Son is before all created things. The Son is from the Father. He understood this from Proverbs chapter 8. This is very contradictory to what Arius understood. Now we're going to look at why does the Greek people hearken to is not going to be an issue here. And I'm going to point out the fact it's really not an issue if we look closely. Because, for example, I take a picture of Proverbs chapter 8 here. As you can see, this is the Hebrew text. So the Hebrew word for to basically here possess me is kanatni. They can translate this to mean to possess me. He acquired me. He took me. He brought me forth. It means a possession. I acquire something. Basically, throughout the Hebrew Bible, it means to acquire, to possess something. So it doesn't mean create. And the New American Bible actually translates the Lord begot me. So we have to understand the Hebrew tradition that the Greek, basically the LXS, is understanding from. Now, in order to expand onto the fact of the LXX, we actually will look on the Deuterocanonical book, another wisdom literature book, because Proverbs is wisdom literature, called the Book of Sirach. The Book of Sirach is basically used in Second Temple Judaism in 200 BC. It's actually widely well known and used in the synagogues. This was basically a wisdom literature book. This was divinely inspired book. Actually, in fact, it wasn't even taken out from the Jewish canon up until the second and third century. In fact, Justin Martyr even uses in quotes from the Book of Wisdom and Sirach to point the fact that the Son is, eternal like the Father and prophesies from. So the Book of Sirach will even expand powers. What do they mean? And this will actually give us an indication. What did Jews understand wisdom? What do they believe about wisdom specifically? Because Proverbs 8 is talking about wisdom, right? And the Son is wisdom. So we look in the prologue of the LXX of Sirach. It says, "All wisdom cometh from the Lord and is from first." Now we're getting understanding of the very first verse. It says, "Wisdom comes from God." It's from God. It's not something external to God. It's not something after God. No, it's from Him. It is with Him. It is relationally with Him, right? Now in verse 4 it says, "Wisdom has been created ekatiste before all things." So before anything was created, supposedly said God created wisdom. Ekatiste, again, same word that the root word ekatisti, basically used in Proverbs chapter 8, ekatiste. And then if we look in Sirach 24, it actually expands on this fact. It says, "Wisdom shall praise herself." So you see the thing I see highlighted in yellow, it signifies that wisdom is an actual person. It is an actual person speaking basically about themselves. And it says, "Shall praise herself." The reason why it's used as in the feminine, because wisdom in Greek is Sophia and is a basically a feminine word. And understanding here is that it's speaking as if an actual person is an actual sentient being. But in verse 3, this is very, very important. He says, "I came forth from the mouth of the Most High." So this is actually important because wisdom is coming from something, not something external out of nothing. It's coming from God, the Most High. It came forth from God. This is actually the procession. Wisdom is being proceeded from God. It came forth from God's mouth. Now, in verse 4 says, "I dwelt in high places, and my throne is in the cloudy pillar." So, 2 points to take here: wisdom, exaltation, and basically such exalted that even dwells in high places. Well, who really dwells in high places? God Himself is the Most High. Basically, He dwells in the highest place. He dwells in the most high places. Well, if it says wisdom comes from God and is with God and is in a high place, well, wisdom must be the Most High with God. And my throne is in a cloudy pillar. Well, wisdom has a throne. Wisdom dwells in a cloudy pillar. Well, that's very significant because in the Hebrew Bible, God actually is the one who rides the clouds. God usually is the one in the pillar of cloud. In the book of Exodus, it says that God was in a cloudy pillar, but yet the angel of the Lord moved and was in a cloudy pillar. Exodus chapter 15. So this actually seems to be born from the tradition of like angelomorphic traditions being used here, that the angel of the Lord seems to be correlated as wisdom himself. There's some connection of that wisdom is that very angel of the Lord traditions being connected here. And again, the thing I highlighted in red, Sirach 24, again, wisdom is again speaking about herself in the first person, seems to be speaking of it as an actual sentient being, not just so much of a what you call poetic literature. This actually seems to be a literary or a literary account of an actual person being spoken here. It says in verse 9, "From eternity, from the beginning, He created me." So again, that same word, same exact in Proverbs, ekatiste me. It says, "From eternity, from the beginning, He created me." So this would actually be contradictory to understand that the wisdom was created at some point in time, some point of an existence, because it says from eternity's past, meaning without time, from the beginning, He made me. So the understand of the Jewish literature and Christian literature, it doesn't mean actually created ex nihilo. It simply means He set me up, just like how Proverbs 8 in the previous slide, or actually two previous slides before understood, it means to set me up. So He set me up, and for eternity I shall not exist to exist. And this is actually what a scholar has to say on this very fact. Charles A. Geishan, in his book, he actually this is what he had to say about the book of about the portrayal of wisdom. In fact, he says the portrayal of wisdom is widely acknowledged as a significant foundation for the development of early Christian teaching about Christ. The question that remains debated, however, is that whether wisdom in these texts should be understood merely as poetic personification of one of God's attributes, or as something more substantial, hypothesized reality, meaning a person. A close look at the sources reveal that in certain traditions, wisdom is depicted not only in the metaphorical terms, but as an actual aspect of God, possessing qualities of independent existence. Similarly to the way God's name and glory functions in Jewish thought, some depictions of wisdom display angel-like features, showing depiction of angelomorphic imagery. So you see here, the traditional wisdom is actually born from angelomorphic traditions. And he actually says here on page 89, wisdom gives impetus to such ideological thought and literary activity. Again, you see here, this is actually being continued on. It went on so forward later in time and history that, again, we Christians will say wisdom is the Christ, basically, himself. So then this is actually continued on tradition. And he goes on to say, and here he says, first portion of this details chapter, how wisdom is to be held in high esteem. Again, the exaltation. It says that she is more precious than any possession in the world. Second, in several places, she vividly personifies a woman whose speech is recorded in the first person, like I said. Third, she is described as a primordial figure who enjoyed a closer relationship with God in the act of creating the world. She's shown to be a figure fairly distinct from God and the rest of his creation. So you see here, wisdom is not a created byproduct of creation. It's not one with creation. It is distinct from the creation and actually distinct from God. Not a separate ontological being, but more in fact, it's not basically God in the same person or a mode. It simply is the fact that the wisdom is a distinct person from God and distinct away from creation. It's not created. Fourth, she is also pictured in intimately involved in the act of creating the world, even as a cosmogenic functions. Very, very interesting. It's a fact. Now, this is what he actually understood about here in page 90, of what the word katiste mean when he created. He actually interprets this as Yahweh begot me. And he actually says in verse 25, says, I was brought forth. Now, this is how he finishes off. He says, unlike other personifications of wisdom in Proverbs, the assertion the text portray her as a hypostasis, meaning a person. Hypostasis is just a person. An aspect of God has a degree of independent personhood, an actual person, an actual sentient being, like I was saying. Wisdom speaks in the first person and refers to God in the third person. Several times, a distinction exists between the origins of wisdom, those of God. Wisdom is also distinct from the rest of creation. She is God's companion, even a participant and master craftsman. And this is what the footnote even has to say. The language of this verse is very important for later use of wisdom theology. The Hebrew translation translated the word procreative begot because there is an emphasis in the text of wisdom in the presence of God before creation began. Contra ekatiste me, he created me, of the LXX. On the LXX translation, seeing Hangul, Judaism, Hellenism. So again, this is understanding that he understood that these will use to be the same thing, begot. There's a begetting. Ekatiste me will mean begotten. So there's no issue here as the fact that created ex nihilo. Now, we have another understanding here. This is actually a Jewish philosopher in theology. He actually is mentioned in the second book of Maccabees, chapter 1, verse 10. And again, another deuterocanonical book. Aristobulus, who is from the 2nd century BC, his commentary on Proverbs 8 is fragmented and is actually preserved by Eusebius of Caesarea. And actually, Aristobulus gives an understanding of what the earliest Jews had an understanding of wisdom. What did they view wisdom? And he says here, more clearly and more beautifully, one of our forefathers, Solomon, said that wisdom subsisted before heaven and earth. This accords with that what was said before. Again, you see here, subsisted can mean was existed before, exist before, but this understanding here is that he understood that wisdom is before heaven and earth. So if we understand the Jewish tradition, Christian tradition, and even language, the word or the understanding the LXX of Proverbs does not mean created ex nihilo. It just simply means it is eternal. It comes from eternity and is with God. It is eternal, just like God. Now, here's another point. People actually will try to use Athanasius, even as a fact to use against Justin the Martyr. But let's see what actually Athanasius has to say and why Athanasius, in fact, will even connect with Justin. What do I mean by that? So in his discourse against Arians, and it's a fact the great doctor of the church Athanasius is a staunch Trinitarian, he says here, he's external to the things which have come to be by will, but rather he himself the living counsel of the Father. So I want people to remember, I want guys to remember this, himself the counsel, because I'll get back to that real quick. How then can the word being the counsel and good pleasure of the Father come into being himself by good pleasure and will like everyone else? So he's actually understanding, he's saying, if you said the Son came into be by the will of the Father, like every other creature, and is the good pleasure of the Father, like every other creature, and yes, we have a problem, then you are a heretic. But what do you understand about Christ? Christ is the living counsel of the Father. Counsel means rationality, his rational. The Son is the living will of the Father, the living counsel of the Father, the living spokesman of the Father. That's exactly what Justin understood when he said that the Son is the rational power of the Father, the rational principle of the Father, that the Son is a rational word of the Father, from the Father. Athanasius and Justin seem to agree right here. And this is very important to understand. Now, this is where actually, in fact, Athanasius points the fact, what do the Arians and other people view here? He says, in the beginning, which wishing the Son to be a creature, and from nothing. This is complete contradictory what Justin believes. Justin believes the Son is from something from the Father, but Arius and others believe that the Son is from nothing, ex nihilo. He is from nothing to something. In fact, Justin doesn't believe that. He says the Son is from the Father and he's totally eternal like the Father. Now, let's actually look what Arius believes here. It's quoted by Athanasius. So it says, God made the Son out of nothing. Very important. Justin doesn't agree. Called him his son. The word of God is one of the creatures. That is a hearken part that Justin doesn't even say the son is a creature. He says the son is before all things were created, before all creatures. The son is not a creature. But Arius does believe that. And once he was not, and he's alterable, capable, and when it is will of altering. So Arius does believe that the son is capable of being altered, the son is a creature, and the son is from nothing. Three things that Justin doesn't agree. Now he says, equal or like himself, he alone has none or one in glory. So he doesn't believe that the Father's glory is the Son's glory. There's no shared in glory here. But Justin again does not agree. Justin does believe there is equal share of glory between the Father and the Son. There is a dyad. There is an equal sharing. Even in fact, he says to Trifo, God does share his glory to his Messiah, his servant. And now Arius says, the unbegotten made the Son a beginning of things originated, and advanced him as a son to himself by adoption. So the Son was created and became a son via creation and adoption. Well, Justin doesn't agree as well. He doesn't agree with the adoption view. He agrees the Son was always a son to the Father. So he says there's nothing proper to God in proper subsistence. So again, nothing from the Son's essence is equal to the Father whatsoever. Nothing is equal. Nothing. There's nothing of the Son's essence that's equal to the Father's essence. And in fact, I wanted to find the fact that Arius, people say Arius had a problem with the Trinity. Well, the word Trinity is not an issue to Arius. In fact, he said there is a triad. He believes there is a Father, Son, Holy Spirit, but he doesn't agree in equal glories. There's no one essence they share. There are distinct essences, each of them, each other, all their subsistences. So they have their own essences. And he says, understand that the monad was, meaning one person, the Father. There always was one person. There was never a dyad, like he just said, but the dyad was not. That's very, very important. I feel like this is a big point of a knockout because Justin does believe there are distinct realities within God. There is a dyad, the Son and Father. There was a dyad, basically like a binitarian view. But Arius doesn't agree. Arius will go against that and say there was really never a dyad. There was always a monad. There always was a monad. No equal share glories. Well, Arius and Justin are two different paths, two complete contradictory paths. Again, the language here Justin's showing and what Arius is showing, Justin is not a semi-Arian or even an Arian, so far as to say. So far, Justin's not an Arian or even a semi-Arian. In fact, people will quote some scholars here and liberal scholars say that Justin had a proto-Arian or a semi-Arian view. Well, so far we went and delve with that and knocked that out. What do other academics say? What do other academics have to say about Justin the Martyr? So this academic is Reverend Dr. Booker. Dr. Booker says that Justin himself states clearly that God alone is the object of worship and honor. Father, Son, and Spirit are certainly including Justin's secular exposition of Christian doctrine. So again, just like I said, God alone is to be worshipped. Well, Reverend Dr. Booker says the same way that the Father, Son, and Spirit are worshipped from Justin's language. So he truly believes that the Son is God, not a created byproduct. And so Justin is well acquainted with the Christian Trinitarian profession of faith. So there is a Trinitarian view within Justin's view. And again, another scholar, Roger E. Olson and Christopher A. Hall, and page 22, this is how they view about Justin. It says, here Justin employs an illustration design that's destined to appear again and again in the Trinitarian thought of the Fathers. Again, the Cappadocian Fathers borrowed Justin's language. Tertullian was even, in fact, influenced by Justin Martyr's language. So a lot of the Fathers actually borrowed Justin's language throughout his writings. Again, why would a Cappadocian Father, staunch Trinitarian, use a semi-Arian or even an Arian person like Justin? Well, it makes no sense there, unless they truly believe Justin was a proto-Trinitarian or a full-on Trinitarian. And he goes on to say, here, Gerald R. Collins note that Justin anticipated a question that was long to be debated in the 4th century of the consubstantiality or being of one essence of the Father and the Son, and that they share the same essence or ousia. So the fire of the fire, it is a early understanding, even an anticipation of what the Arians will not agree, that the Father and Son share the same essence, the consubstantiality of the Father and the Son. Justin gives you that point blank. Well, this is a huge, complete difference between areas. Now he goes on to say, not only does Justin anticipate future discussion of the consubstantiality of the Father and the Son, but he is first to connect the Christ with the wisdom of God mentioned in Proverbs chapter 8, just like I just mentioned previously. He inaugurates the lasting patristic image, light from light, that's later incorporated in Nicene Creed. This is a huge thing. Athanasius, who was very spearheading in Nicaea and early other Trinitarians, they were very careful and they condemned people who didn't have a Trinitarian view. But yet they borrowed Justin's language, light from light, in the Nicene Creed. Light from light, true God from true God, begotten, not made, consubstantial with the Father. Two big points. Justin gives you the consubstantiality of the Father, and he gives you the light of light analogy. Very, very interesting that Justin will be used for that very sake. In fact, he says, page 23, they said that still, even if Justin encourages to swerve off the path, at points, if he swerves off, he says, Justin still will listen to church at worship in prayers, liturgies, creedal confessions, generally kept him moving in the right direction. In his first apology, writes, we reveal and worship him, the true God and Son, who came from him and taught us these things, and the prophetic spirit. Justin seemed to realize that the church worship Father, Son, Spirit, a Trinitarian model of some kind must be forthcoming, and he provided the planks in its construction. So Justin gave you the planks. So Justin Martyr, there was a Trinitarian view, there was a Trinitarian model happening within the early church, and Justin Martyr gave you arguments and gave you basically the very footstool to you. So Justin Martyr was a Trinitarian. Again, this is another scholar from Thomas Joseph White OP in page 115. He says, and his thought, when judged by later standards, is unambiguously proto-Trinitarian, not proto-Arian, not proto-Samaritan, a proto-Trinitarian. This is more the academic view that he had a Trinitarian view, but wasn't fully articulated yet. Again, this comes from Robert M. Bowman Jr. Again, another academic, I would say a staunch academic in Trinitarianism, evangelical scholar. So it says the fact that Justin taught that the pre-human Jesus was God, not an angel. Jesus, he did say that Christ was an angel, but explained that this was because Christ actually was God, right? Took on the appearance of an angel. Thus, Justin writes that Justin not only believed that Christ was God, he believed in the rudimentary form of the Trinity. So there was a view of Justin's Trinitarian view. There was. Thus, to say that Christians worship God the Father, the Son, and the prophetic Spirit, that this meant that the Christ and Spirit were both God, is also implied by the repeated statement that we ought to worship God alone. To God alone we render worship. In short, although Justin Martyr did not use such terms as the Trinity, and it's obvious the word Trinity hasn't come up until the time of Tertullian origin, in his philosophical explanations of the relations of Christ to God were somewhat confused at times. He worshipped Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and he regarded Christ as Jehovah God. This is very, very important. So Justin Martyr, even though wasn't fully articulated in the fact of Trinity because he didn't have the Nicene Creed in front of him, he still gave you a view that there is a Trinity. He does believe there is a triad within God, or even as to say the least, a dyad within God, distinct realities within God. Again, this another scholar, Michael Efber, from page 150 151, says, to that end, we can detect a very strong sense of divinity attributed to the Logos. He was pre-existed before creation and already existed as God. But the firstborn of Logos of God is also God. Just like I said, kind begets kind. Jesus is begotten from the Father, not in an excision, apotomie, but by his essence. Jesus is distinct in number, but not in substance. Eric Osborne summarizes Justin's thought well enough. The Word is God's firstborn, God himself, second to him in number, but one with him in essence. Again, the Son is distinct from the Father in the number, second, third, first, but one with him essence. The essence they share is fully equal. So this is all basically what the scholars have to say about Justin the Martyr. Now, here's the actual Greek text if you actually were to look at it. This, again, comes from the Patrologia Grece or Grace, whatever way you like to pronounce. You can find this in Google Books. This is actually what words mean here. It does not mean subject whatsoever. We actually checked the Greek text. It should say here, theos kai kurios heteros hippo, in page 597. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, right? Just like I said, I put my first premise. Now let me go for the second premise. Why first and second don't agree on the main thesis that Justin Martyr is a ontological subordinationist? Why? Because we already just discussed that Justin Martyr already put the fact that the divine essence is shared and there's no ontological subordinationism. So we can put the fact that as a classic Trinitarian he believed that the Son is subordinate to the Father in role. Not in nature, but role. This is not heretical, still Orthodox Trinitarianism, and we agree. In a Trinitarian economia or the economy, the Son to the Father, the Holy Spirit to the Father is still submissive, or would you like to say subordinate? We don't long say subordinate because subordinate is really much of a strong word to confuse subordinationism. But this is actually what the footnoter Migne had to say about that quotation. He says, but it should not be troubling that Justin subjects the Son to the Father. For Justin subjects the Son to the Father as the source and origin of all divinity, not as a servant to his Creator. So, meaning, the Son will acknowledge the Father as the origin and source of the Son's essence, not an ontological being to God, basically. Not as an ontological being to God, but to understand that the Father is the source of the Son's essence and the origin of the Son's divinity. And he says this is quite evident from those passages where Justin discussions concerning Christ's divinity are either already noted by us or will be noted later. So the Mignes gives the point, okay, it does form a hierarchy, but what does it mean hierarchy? In person, not in essence. Again, this comes from actually the critical Greek text of Justin the Martyr. In page 111, he says here in the footnote, says, it's proper to remark that the subordination here indicated does not imply inequality of essence, but of person. In the infinite perfections of Godhead, there can be no idea or more or less but in respect of person. Father who begot must be superior to the Son who was begotten, and upon the inequality and subordination in question, rest. So he says there's no inequality within the essence of God because the essence of God is fully sharing the same level as the other. Nothing is over than the other. Only the personhood, he'll argue, is what you like to say superior. The Father begets, superior than a Son who is begotten. Again, both of these views will not give the fact that Justin Martyr believed in ontological subordinationism, because that's the main thesis here. So here's my conclusion here. The translation from New Advent mistranslates actually the Greek. I would just say check the critical Greek text of the translations. If it translates properly, I don't mean don't use the New Advent wholeheartedly. The New Advent is, it's pretty good. You can use it, but just double check because stuff like this can happen. The word under doesn't mean literally the Son is beneath the Father ontologically, that the Son is lesser deity. Because again, understanding of first and second century men in early Judaism, two powers of heaven, and Justin Martyr, it can refer a location, even according to Father's language at times. That God the Father is in heaven and God the Son on earth in terms of under, not ontological subordinationist. And again, the third point, Justin Martyr is a full-on Trinitarian. He truly believes the Father, Son, and Spirit are the one God, not gods, not different gods. And if he was a heretic, I'll put the fact that why didn't other church councils or church fathers condemn Justin as a heretic? Like Tertullian was condemned. Eusebius Caesarea was condemned. Origen was heavily condemned. But yet Justin Martyr is held to be one of the greatest anti-Nicene writers of church history. Secondly, most all put the fact, in Orthodox Christian doctrine, there is a form of submission of the Son to the Father and the Holy Spirit to the Father, not ontological, but relational submission. Just like I just said previously, the Trinitarian economia. So there's nothing wrong with that view as well. If you take one view or the other, like I pointed out, the two views I just said. And again, in part two, I'll be addressing another argument, but just for the heads up, the other argument is to understand that why did Justin say the word another God? What does he mean when he said that word another God? And I'll be discussing us to that, why that's, again, not the case. He's an Arian or a semi-Arian or even a tritheist for that very language. I'd like to thank you guys for watching this video. I hope you guys were edified. I'll see you guys on the next video.